Hey everybody, we're gonna get started here in a couple minutes, and Mira will facilitate for a couple seconds, really. No, I think we're pretty filled out here. Okay.
All right. Good evening, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. We'll hear from Mayor Avula and Scott Morris, Director of DPU. We will be taking questions. If you can put them in the chat, please, and I will be calling them out from the chat. And we will go ahead and get started. You are muted and videos are turned off. And we are recording, and we will post this on the YouTube channel, and we'll send it out afterwards.
Yeah, can everybody give me a thumbs up? I just want to make sure everyone can hear us and hear Mira pretty well. She's sitting next to me, but
Maybe drop something in the chat if you can or cannot hear.
great. Thank you, Michael. Okay. Well, let me just get started with a quick recap. Obviously, mid-morning, we had to issue the initial boil water advisory on the distribution of 2N, that northern part of the city, north of the river. This afternoon, late afternoon, we saw pressure drop in one of our south side distributions. Basically, it's called 1S, and it's the area south of the river, east of Richmond Highway. And so we issued a boil water advisory for that distribution zone as well. Since then, we have seen great recovery both of production and of pressures. We are now making 55 million gallons a day, so back up to our normal operating water production. And then we have also seen the reservoir grow from about 4.6 feet earlier in the day now to 7.2 feet. So not only are we pressurized throughout the system, but we're seeing the reservoir grow as well. That has allowed us to go ahead and take our first samples. So the initial round of samples in both of those zones has happened. Now, as long as we make it through this evening's peak utilization period and the morning utilization without dropping below that 20 psi, that timing of that sample should hold. So that's very good news. And again, given the production that we're seeing and the pressures that we're seeing, hopefully all will look good for that. And our next set of samples will be pulled at some point around midday tomorrow. Just so everyone remembers, to clear the boil water advisory, we need 2 samples that are taken 16 to 24 hours apart, and then both of those samples need to be negative for a full 24 hours after the sample was pulled. And so we'll continue to update everybody on that progress. And so, at this point, we're looking at likely, well, not likely, but, hopefully midday Thursday would be the earliest that we'd be able to lift the boil water advisory. But we will keep everybody abreast of how that sampling process plays out. Maybe that's all for now. Oh, just again, remember everyone is, as they go to bed tonight, we expect continued production. The reservoirs will continue to fill up, but when everybody wakes up, we will still be under a boil water advisory. And so make sure that for any water that you're trying to drink, make sure that it is boiled first, but people should absolutely do laundry, take showers, all the things you'd need to do. But just remember, for any water that's consumed needs to be boiled first. Okay, let's jump to questions.
Okay, we've got a question about mixed messaging on getting release this morning, that things were fine, and then a short period later that they were not. Did that follow your crisis communications plan? How do you respond to the concerns?
Yeah, our policy here has been to try to get the information out as quickly as possible. We knew that there were concerns overnight and that people were we wanted to make sure that people knew what was happening, that we had issues overnight, and that we, by the morning at 7 a.m., had resolved those issues. We had flushed the filters, and we were back up to full production, which is why we issued the press release. Within maybe an hour to 2 hours after that press release, we saw reclogging of the filters. And so it was a new set of circumstances. I think this is the challenge when you have a dynamic situation. We want to just make sure that we are consistently providing people with the information as we know it, and then as we have an update, we're gonna have to provide people with updated information. I know that at times that's going to frustrate people because these situations are dynamic and the information is going to change. And all we can do is do our best to keep people abreast of the most up-to-date information and what our next steps are going to be.
Okay, we've got a question about what specifically happened to cause the operational issue. Why does this keep happening at the plant? And do you expect to see this keep happening in the foreseeable future? So that's probably a Scott.
Yeah, I'll let Scott handle the specifics about that. But I will say that why does this keep happening? I mean, what happened overnight and this morning was a different situation than what we were dealing with in January. And I know for the public, the frustration is, why does the plant keep going down? I just want to be clear that these are separate issues. But I'll let Scott talk about sort of the specifics of what happened this time, some of which we're still discovering.
Yeah. So when we talk about what happened at the facility, like Mayor was referencing, these are two separate instances. One was a flooding issue, and one is a turbidity issue. Turbidity in the raw water can come from a high a multitude of factors. So one of the actions that we're going to be coordinating with VDH after this is a sit down and after action review, talking about what caused the high turbidity. Was it something in the raw water? Was it how we operate our facilities? And ways that we can improve this and then incorporate that into our standard operations to make sure that this event doesn't happen in the future. There's always a learning opportunity to figure out how we can better improve our systems, but ultimately we are going to have to sit down with VDH and have that discussion.
Go ahead.
Okay. Any updates on the cause of the turbidity in the water? Is that just because the river has been high, or would it take something more unusual to cause this amount of filter clogging? Anything further on that?
Yeah,
Scott?
nothing further on that as part of the review. This is something that we're going to be talking through and working through, and we'll report out on what that issue is and what's the determination and how we can rectify it going forward. But no additional information, no.
Okay. Mayor Avula, do you have any updates on schools to share at this time?
I do not actually. Maybe we can get that answer while we're still on this call. I have not heard the latest from them. But let me work on that.
Okay, we'll work on that. Mayor Avula and Director Morris, are there concerns about the long-term viability of the water plant? Is another incident this close to January's outage viewed as a coincidence? If you want to address the first part.
Yeah, I mean, clearly January's events, now this, we have seen in past assessments that there are concerns about the ongoing operation of the plant. And a plant is something that you need to keep making investments in, keep making updates to. After January, we made the decision to, I mean, obviously we did a lot of work in the wake of January's event to invest in filters and pumps and install some new ones. But we also made decisions to accelerate investments in the water treatment plant to ensure its long-term future. So, Yeah, I think we are acting differently because of the events of January. We know that we've got to make investments on a more rapid timeline. Scott has begun some of that work, and that work is both the investments in the actual infrastructure, but it's also the work in our staff, and making sure that we've got the right complement of staff and that we've got the right systems, that we've got the right procedures. And so that's the work that Scott is really leaning into. Dr. Morris, I'll let you kind of expound on that or handle the next part of the question.
Oh, no, no, most certainly agree with that. We are continuing to invest heavily in the infrastructure at the water treatment plant, investing heavily in our staff, creating standard operating procedures to try to reinforce how we operate. One thing that we had great improvement on this instance over the previous one was our communication plan. It worked effectively, and we had regional cooperation, open discussion with EDH in a timely fashion. So that's one positive from the event, that we were able to execute and get communications out to our regional partners and reduce the severity of the event.
All right, question for Director Morris. What is your message to restaurant owners tonight moving forward, or also possibly Mayor Avula? Either of you want to take that one?
I mean, as I said on our last call, there are guidelines for restaurants operating under a boil water advisory. We would encourage all restaurants to do that. I'm going to post the link right now in the chat to the VDH website that outlines what those guidelines are, and then happy to help route questions to the right places if restaurants have ongoing questions. But we absolutely want to encourage restaurants to continue to operate.
Mayor Avula, any updates, any new updates regarding Richmond Ready?
I think that's the same question that Ryan posted about our alerting. Ross is continuing to work on that, and we'll get updates about what's the work we're doing with Rich and Ready for everybody as soon as we can. I was looking at the data earlier, and the first update that went out around 11 a.m. Went out to about 3,800 users, and then the second update went out to a little over 5,000 users. Now, if people are not receiving those, if people registered and are not receiving them, we do need to do some diagnostic work to figure out why that's happened. And so that's what Ross is working on.
All right, Mayor Avula, can you give an update or news on possible water distribution sites?
Well, I'll let Scott speak to pressures, but I mentioned the two distribution sites that had decreased pressure, and that led to the boil water advisory. But since then, we've seen a real rebound in pressures across the system. Scott?
Yeah, the pressures in the system have maintained above 20 psi, and then we've seen slight elevation or drops in pressure. But I believe this is more towards or stem towards actual bottled water distribution, Mayor, maybe.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. I missed that. Okay. Any news on possible water distribution sites? Okay. We have again mapped out our plans to deliver water as needed to facilities or congregate care settings where people can't boil water or can't do that themselves. The message to everybody is, we've seen restored pressure pretty much across the system, and so we would really urge people to, if they're going to consume water in their house, to boil the water. We do know that there are certain settings where that it will be difficult, and so more news tomorrow at the morning at our morning update, which we hope to do around 8 a.m.
Okay, a couple of other questions coming in. Follow up on the turbidity Is the water, Scott, this is probably for you, is the water coming into the plant still as turbid as it was last night? What has been done to make sure the water won't cause more clogging?
Yeah, so the raw water quality has improved. We spoke to this a little bit on how our plan of action was to move forward. As we get through this peak demand period, as demands drop off, we are going to go through a backwash sequence on our filters, and that will subsequently improve our ability to produce water and clear up those filters. So that will reduce the likelihood of basically the filters clogging in the future, even though we may have a higher turbidity level in the raw water intake.
So getting a question about related to some businesses. This may be for you, Mayor Avula, or maybe something we need to look into and get back on. Their business insurance policy specifically excludes coverage for boil water advisories. However, some businesses, for example, restaurants, have experienced a complete loss of water pressure, which has forced some to shut down. How is the decision made to classify this as an advisory and not an outage? Maybe that's a Scott question.
I mean, I think if folks, we may need to have some individual conversations with businesses, but any loss of pressure, what we're hearing has been pretty temporary, right? We're already seeing pressures return this evening, so I don't know. I mean, I think we need to look more into that for businesses that were impacted, but it's a boiled water advisory because we never lost production of the system, and the advisory was because we dropped pressure below the 20 psi mark. Scott, anything else you'd say there?
Yep, no, you're spot on. So a loss of pressure would be like a zero. A loss of water advisory is when we drop below the 20 psi in the system. And we do that as precautionary measure to make sure that we continue to monitor residuals and then flow in the system and pressures in the systems, and then take subsequent samples to bring the system back online. So two different items.
Okay, I think this is the last question. I missed this one. Can you confirm if the second sample takes place at 16 hours or 24 hours?
Scott, do you want to speak to the guidelines?
Yeah, so the guidelines, we had discussions with VDH on this. It's 16 hours from the first sample, and that's the minimum requirement. So you have to wait at least 16 hours. And I think the mayor was referencing a permittable time that you can take the samples. And so that gives you a little bit of time period where you can go out, grab the sample, bring it back to the lab, and then start doing an analysis. So minimum time frame you have to have is 16 hours. 24 hours is like just a general guideline on up to. You just have to meet the minimum time frame, which is the 16 hours.
And then the reading of those tests occurs 24 hours after the sample has been pulled, because you've got to watch that grow in the lab for a full 24 hours before you can deem it a negative test. Okay, it looks like that's the end of the questions here. We will make sure that we're updating folks again around 8 a.m. tomorrow with the events of the evening. That will either be a media advisory or, if needed, we'll do another virtual press conference. Thanks, everybody.